The Southern Poverty Law Center indicted and expects a lot of fallout. Meanwhile, California looking to mandate hate speech training. America's talking, and in Illinois, they passed the Bears Megaprojects bill. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, April 23rd, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Michigan Secretary of State and Democratic gubernatorial candidate Jocelyn Benson facing scrutiny over her past role with the Southern Poverty Law Center following a federal indictment against that organization. That indictment coming down Tuesday, and it's got a lot of people not familiar with the SPLC wondering who exactly is the Southern Poverty Law Center. Well, it was founded in 1971 in Montgomery, Alabama. In the end of the 1980s, the SLPC, they had officially rebranded themselves into a group that purposefully monitors hate in America. They also produce an annual intelligence project that monitors so-called extremist organizations and hate groups. Now, the indictment filed Tuesday says that the SPLC began operating a covert network of individuals who were either associated with violence and extremist groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan, or who had infiltrated violent extremist groups at the SPLC's direction. Now, the indictment says, unbeknownst to donors, some of their donated money was used to fund the leaders of organizations of racist groups at the same time that the SPLC was denouncing those same groups on its website. Here's Acting U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche explaining part of that indictment.
According to the charges in the indictment, the SPLC is a nonprofit entity that purports to fight white supremacy and racial hatred by reporting on extremist groups and conducting research to inform law enforcement groups with the goal of dismantling these groups. As the indictment describes, the SPLC was not dismantling these groups. It was instead manufacturing the extremism it purports to oppose by paying sources to stoke racial hatred.
Now, the SPLC is regularly cited by some corporate media as an authority on what are hate groups and what is hate speech, and they even are integral in some progressive movements in state houses across the country to advance different types of legislation. But the federal indictment coming from the Department of Justice, it alleges that between 2014 and 2023, SPLC gave $3 million to individuals associated with the Ku Klux Klan, United Klans of America, Unite the Right, National Alliance, National Socialist Movement, Aryan Nations affiliated, Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club, also the American Nazi Party, and a group called the American Front. Other work the SLPC was doing that doesn't directly tie to the indictment, again, was going to state houses across the country and advocating for those progressive policies or advocating against conservative policies that touched on things from property taxes to education and so much more. Now, SPLC CEO Brian Fair said the group is outraged by the false accusations. That's a quote. He further said, taking on violent hate and extremist groups is among the most dangerous work there is, and he says they believe it is also among the most important work they do. He continued to say, to be clear, he says the program has saved lives. Now, Southern Poverty Law Center will increase public scrutiny of the tax-exempt organizations, which had nearly $800 million in assets, according to a research analyst after the indictment. Senior research analyst at American think tank Capital Research Center, Robert Stilson, he's told the Center Square that at a minimum, the Southern Poverty Law Center's indictment will further increase that public scrutiny. Now, back to Michigan, Secretary of State Benson's office did not respond to a request for comment from the Center Square regarding her role on the Southern Poverty Law Center's board or the federal charges that were filed against the SPLC. She has not released a statement regarding that indictment. Separately, Benson's also facing multiple lawsuits alleging racial discrimination within the Michigan Department of State, which she leads. You can find more of that story and the ongoing coverage of the lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Law Center at thecentersquare.com. On somewhat of a similar topic, California legislators, they're considering bills that would expand requiring training for public officials to include instruction on anti-hate speech. Joining us to discuss that California bill is Esther Wickham, education reporter for the Center Square. Esther, what exactly is the definition of hate speech? And is that a sticking point in what some of the opponents have raised about this?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg, for having me. Assembly Bill 1578 has definitely drawn a lot of debate in California on both sides, having some concern about exactly what you said. What is the definition of hate speech? And at the same time, holding public officials, city council members, and people in education officials accountable for what they say, what they post on social media. And so this bill has definitely drawn some criticism as well as a lot of support from school districts. But what we're seeing is California lawmakers, specifically Democrat Corey Jackson, who's based out of Riverside City in Southern California. He brought this bill about along with two other bills with two other California lawmakers to essentially, incentivize public officials to really think about, what they say and when they post certain things or say certain things, is it hate or is it, good and beneficial for for society, for citizens to hear and listen to, because they are, public officials. They do have some weight to what they say. And so I think he's hoping that this bill kind of raises awareness to it. But in my conversation with him, the Center Square was able to interview Corey Jackson. I asked him that exact question, the concern around this definition of hate speech. And he referred me to the Commission of State on Hate, which is, a specific department in the state of California. And when researching this, there isn't a clear, specific definition of hate speech, but something that he highlights is that a lot of times hate speech can turn into a hate crime, which is a criminal offense. And so there isn't necessarily some specific clarity on what exactly hate speech pertains. And I think this is where this draws a lot of criticism, because it's kind of vague and ambiguous, and that's kind of what a lot of critics have said about the bill.
We, of course, have a First Amendment right to free speech. I don't think there's anything in there that says except for speech that certain people may be offended by. But I think that kind of comes to the crux of what the arguments are here. You had Jean Chadbourne from the organization Women Are Real testify against this measure, and I think she kind of really encapsulates what the opponents' main concern about one group saying this is hate speech to get control over another group. Let's hear what she had to say.
This bill doesn't define hate speech. In fact, hate speech has no definition in California or federal law. The Commission on the State of Hate, whose findings form the basis for this bill, relies on self-reported survey data using an extremely expansive definition of hate. That includes non-criminal acts and, I kid you not, political opposition. And frankly, Women Are Real knows exactly how hate speech gets defined in practice, because we have been on the receiving end of that definition in this very building. On March 17th, our witness testified, raising concerns about boys and girls' locker rooms. Assemblymember Quirk Silva responded that we were, quote, spewing hate. Assemblymember Zabur followed, saying he was tired of us hating other kids. Last year, before the same committee, he compared our support for female-only sports to Nazi Germany. These government officials have decided advocating for women's rights is hate. This is a good example of why we cannot let the government dictate what hate is.
Again, going back to that principle within the First Amendment, free speech. Is this an argument that's going to sway people, or how do you see this particular measure advancing at the California State House?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a good question. And when posed to lawmakers, and especially Dr. Jackson, he just referred to the Commission of State on Hate, saying, I'm not going to add any new definitions. I don't think that would be a good idea. I'm going to refer to what is stated. And so then I was able to, do some digging, do my own research, and exactly what Ms. Chadbourne said. There isn't a clear federal definition of hate aside from a hate crime, which is very specific and direct. And I think a lot of people that oppose this bill have that concern of, okay, well, what is harmful? What is hateful? Is it, simply subjective based on if it's a political opinion that is, hateful, or is it, something concrete you can understand and recognize? And this bill essentially, in lieu of sexual harassment training, is going to essentially encourage that. It's going to add 1 hour of anti-hate speech training to sexual harassment prevention training. And this is going to be required by state and local officials. And so though this may be, have some support from people saying, yes, we need more accountability for our public officials to recognize that they, hold power in what they say and what they do, and it could incentivize other people to do certain things. At the end of the day, a lot of people that are opposing this bill are asking that exact question and aren't really getting an answer on, okay, what is actually hateful, and is this blocking the door to open discourse, to civil discourse, to have good debate and good conversations around things that individuals might not agree with, because that is very different than saying a specific thing that could bring out harm or could lead to someone's death or personal injury. So there's definitely some nuance to it, and so it'll be interesting to see how the bill passes along.
Yeah, the nuance is important here, but also if there's going to be double standards, right? If the Democrats in control in California label a certain thing hate speech, how could that be used against them if, say, Republicans were to take control of the legislature? Not sure that's going to happen in California anytime soon, but just that idea of, put the shoe on the other foot and see how that fits. And this is obviously one of those crucial arguments, especially when you're talking about elected officials getting this training, but even down to the teachers and how that could possibly impact their education process and how they're educating children in schools. Definitely something people need to keep an eye on, and be sure to subscribe to the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. Esther, other things you're working on, obviously keeping an eye on not just K through 12 education, but also education in colleges and universities. Tell us what the U.S. Department of Education is doing to try to bring about some more accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really interesting that the U.S. Department of Education announced their recent rule and proposal that aims at, again, holding colleges and universities accountable for specific programs when it leaves students unsure of what they're going to do post-grad. And, we've seen over the years, and especially the recent months, the student loan debt portfolio just absolutely skyrocket. We are currently at $1.7 trillion in student debt. And at the same time, we have over 70% of college students not having jobs in their career field, in the major that they focused on in college, which is absolutely mind-boggling and really disappointing. And so I think for the Department of Education to come out with this new proposal, it's titled the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. This essentially is going to establish accountability within colleges and universities, and this is designed to address that exact concern. Are students financially worse off if they had not attended college? Is this actually going to help students if they go to this college and major in this specific major? Once they graduate, are they able to get a job in that specific career? And so based on that, the Department of Education, looking at President Trump's recent Working Families Tax Cut Act, which came out of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which aims at cutting taxes. This proposal is essentially going to look at the benchmark requirements for certain majors and certain programs within universities and seeing if students are actually hitting that benchmark. Once they graduate, they're also going to track the data of, okay, are they going into that specific career field? How much are they making? And they're going to compare that data to individuals between, I believe, the age of 25 and 34 that graduated only with a high school diploma, and seeing, are they more, beneficial, or are they better off having gone to college with that specific major than if they had just graduated from high school and gone straight into the workforce?
Yeah,
So
I would imagine, the people who don't have any part of that $1.7 trillion in student loan debt are the people who probably went to trade school right after college, did some apprenticeship work, got dirty in a ditch, or are doing plumbing or electrical or even truck driving. I mean, these are really good paying jobs that people don't have to rack up $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. So you do think that... Go ahead.
And at the same time, education has so many grants and scholarship opportunities that aren't being claimed. In the past year, there was over $4 billion in grant programs, the Pell Grant and various other grant programs around the country that weren't claimed by students, simply because I think a lot of students sadly aren't educated about education, scholarships, and grants. And so I think that there's just been this system where they don't really want to do the work, and they're just incentivized to just, requesting student loans and getting that is easier than having to write a quick essay, from this random grant or scholarship program. And so that's unfortunately been happening as well.
No question. And I think it's going to be interesting to see the data in this when they start comparing, a 4-year degree in dark age poetry and somebody racking up $40,000 in debt just to get that degree, and does that actually translate to having a worthwhile career that's going to actually pay? Absolutely. And so this will be interesting to keep an eye on. Esther Wickham, another reason why people need to go and check out your work at thecentersquare.com. Greatly appreciate you taking the time. We'll talk with her again very soon. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. A Virginia Circuit Court judge blocking certification of a special election tied to the state's redistricting amendments, and that election just happened Tuesday. Now the state officials preparing to appeal the decision, and candidate filing deadlines just 5 weeks away. The Center Square reporter, Charlene Guerrera, reports the referendum was decided by voters this week. With all precincts in, the Virginia Department of Elections ruled the yes votes an official winner, unofficial, at 51.5% to 48.6% from the more than 3 million votes that were cast Tuesday. The total, still pending mail votes, counted by noon Friday. On Wednesday, they were about 1.5 million to 1.4 million, and a hearing was held in Tazewell County, Virginia, Circuit Court, in an injunction case challenging that referendum. According to court records, the case involves plaintiffs like the Republican National Committee and other GOP-affiliated groups, and names the Virginia Department of Elections among the defendants. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis in Jacksonville Wednesday slamming the ideology behind what he calls discrimination of white males, saying it would protect taxpayers of Florida. The second-term Republican applied signature to proposals linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and to environmental, social, and governance policies and investments, commonly and respectively known as DEI and ESG. The governor said residents should not be forced to pay for radical climate agendas or identity politics with their hard-earned tax dollars. The Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten reports DeSantis said the diversity ideology promotes a political agenda to the detriment of disfavored groups. Openness and transparency is now an issue in Wisconsin's race for governor. The Center Square contributor Benjamin Yount reports Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, who is one of 7 Democratic candidates for the state's top seat, last week said she would craft a new state budget in secret to avoid Democratic opposition if she's elected in November. Rodriguez's focus on working with Democratic leaders behind the scenes is also a bit of criticism of how Governor Tony Evers crafted 3 of his 4 state budgets. Evers routinely worked on budgets on his own, then delivered his spending plan to lawmakers. A number of Democratic lawmakers didn't like that approach. Soccer fans leaving Lincoln Financial Field this summer after the World Cup matches in Philadelphia will be able to ride SEPTA for free. Announced earlier this week, Airbnb has teamed up with Philadelphia Soccer 2026 to provide complimentary bus rides from SEPTA's Broad Street line after all 6 FIFA World Cup matches in South Philadelphia. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro celebrated that announcement, saying that the sport's big business in Pennsylvania and a key part to what makes the Commonwealth. He says a great place to live and visit. Airbnb's listed as an official FIFA World Cup 2026 tournament supporter, while Philadelphia Soccer 2026 is the nonprofit local organizing committee for FIFA World Cup in Philadelphia. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Again, get these stories in the description below, but you can also get them in your inbox. Subscribe to the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. The Chicago Bears say a Megaprojects deal that passed the Illinois House yesterday needs additional amendments in order to make Arlington Heights a feasible stadium site. Now, the Bears said in a statement they support Illinois leaders as they determine the path to make essential changes in aligning on infrastructure funding. The House passed a bill Wednesday night late that the sponsor says changes the legislation prohibit data centers using incentives, a tiered duration for tax freezes depending on the dollar amount of the development, and a 7-year sunset on the bill so lawmakers could evaluate how it goes before deciding whether to continue it. Speaker Chris Welch, he said that they got the bill across the line of scrimmage before the clock ran out yesterday.
What began as a conversation about the Chicago Bears resulted in a statewide tool for economic development paired with real property tax relief for working people.
Here's the sponsor of the measure, Chicago Democratic State Representative Cam Buckner.
When you talk about what was in this bill and the stuff that we worked on with the governor's office and the Senate office and the Senate since January, this is the framework that not only I think will remind the Bears that this is their home, but it will remind other developers and organizations across the state and across the country who may want to stay here or come here why this framework makes us competitive.
So again, not specifically about the Bears, but the Bears seeing it as something they could work on with legislators. After the bill passed the House yesterday, it still can be brought up in the Senate where more amendments could be made before going back to the House for concurrence. Again, they have a May 31st deadline to finish everything up with simple majorities. Clearly, a lot of people are going to be watching that end zone timeline. Now, Buckner, he said another tool in the bill is new opportunities for vacation and adventure districts. And that includes at least 500 contiguous acres, producing at least $500 million in capital investment and generating at least $300 million in annual gross sales, and attract at least 1 million annual visitors, create at least 1,500 annual jobs. That's just one of the parameters to be able to get special incentives like tax breaks and such to make those types of developments. Now, once the state certifies a mega project developer, the bill says the developer would then negotiate an incentive agreement with the local taxing body. The developer would then make a payment with 50% going toward property tax relief. But Americans for Prosperity Illinois Deputy State Director Brian Costin, he expressed to a committee concerns about the constitutionality of picking winners and losers, with some businesses paying different property tax rates than other businesses.
If I was a business owner, I'd be really scared. I'd try to move into the mega project district. So there's a wide disparity. In the mega project districts, we do think this is going to create a lot of development. There's going to be some of the lowest property taxes in the nation assessed on properties inside the mega project district, but outside the mega project districts, we're going to see some of the highest property taxes in the nation already. And without fixing these portions of the bill, we think that over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, up to 45 years, that these property tax rates can double or triple. And we're concerned on what that might make those communities look like if that's not rectified.
Now, on the House floor late Wednesday, the measure did get bipartisan support, Republican State Representative Martin McLaughlin, he says they should go ahead and advance this measure.
One thing I do know is my friends on the other side of the aisle and the governor certainly cannot afford for the Bears to leave the state of Illinois, and more time will cause greater expense to the tunes of billions of dollars of incentives. So for that reason, to stop the bleeding on incentives and taxpayers, I urge that we move forward.
Please bring your remarks to a close.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Just one final sentence. So I urge that we move this project forward because, let's face it, guys, it's going to happen, and the longer we wait, I can't watch billions of dollars more in incentives be thrown away. So I'm going to advocate for this at this time.
But other Republicans were skeptical. Republican State Representative Blaine Wilhauer, he criticized the bill and also Democrats for advancing it.
But if you're a homeowner, a farmer, a small business person, you pay the full value. No questions asked. You don't get to go in the back rooms and cut deals like this. Now, here's the part that should alarm every taxpayer in Illinois, because this is where the real damage happens. This deal allows local governments to treat projects as fully developed for borrowing and levy purposes. Like all that new value is on the books, while the corporation is only paying taxes based on the pre-development value. Think about that. Government gets to spend and borrow and build their budgets like it's a multi-billion-dollar property. But it's only collecting taxes on a fraction of that.
And while there was bipartisan support for the measure, there was also bipartisan opposition. Chicago Democratic State Representative Lillian Jimenez worried that the measure, it leaves certain communities behind.
I feel that these incentives, while working towards a mega project, really leaves out behind a lot of our communities in the northwest side and west side of Chicago and many communities. Homelessness was brought up. I do believe that the homelessness situation in our communities needs to be addressed, and I don't see this project as being the solution to that.
Now again, the measure passed the House. The Senate expected to take it up next week, where they could possibly amend the bill and then get it over back to the House for concurrence. That May 31st deadline rapidly approaching. Now, another measure we reported on yesterday here at the Center Square Daily that was expected to come up was a measure impacting how the state draws legislative and congressional maps. According to the House Speaker's bill, the priorities are in order for all districts to have near equal population when they're drawing maps, to provide equal opportunity for all citizens, regardless of race, when they're drawing maps, the creation of districts with racial minority influence, and for district borders to be unbroken and compact. And this is a simple question being asked to voters. But Republicans see it differently. State Representative Ryan Spain, he criticized the proposed amendment. He said they need an independent commission to draw maps so that voters are choosing their elected officials, not politicians picking their voters. And he urged for this proposed constitutional amendment that could appear on the November ballot to be voted down.
This is not democracy in action. This is the embodiment of the corruption of absolute power. It is wrong. In Illinois, if you like the way things are going, if you like paying the highest property taxes in the country, rising cost of living, out of control debt, a state that continues to be plagued again and again by ethics and corruption scandal, then you'll love this constitutional amendment. But if you don't, if you're tired of seeing your family fleeing the state of Illinois, your children and grandchildren exiting for better opportunities in other places, you need to vote no on this amendment.
Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch, who brought the amendment forward, he said the measures needed to protect voting rights in Illinois.
When I look at that portrait of Abraham Lincoln watching over us from the Republican side of the aisle, I recall his words that a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Those words and that vision guided our country through our darkest hours. Let's show everyone today that in the land of Lincoln, we still believe that a democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people must include all of the people.
Now, while they have a May 31st deadline to pass legislation with simple majorities, they have a May 3rd deadline to approve constitutional amendment proposals in order to get it on the November ballot. So that measure making it across the finish line in the House before it goes to the Senate, who returns next week, and they could take that redistricting proposal up. Again, it doesn't change the state's maps now, but it lays out some guidance for how they will remap in the future. But that May 3rd deadline is going to come before the House has an opportunity to take up that proposed millionaire's tax, something else we reported about yesterday, expecting it to come up, but that did not happen last night. Here is the speaker saying how he still says there needs to be work done to the bill.
You know, I am a big supporter of taxing the rich. I believe that the rich should pay more to help us do more. For those who much is given, much is required. But I've said a number of times that the title on that door shouldn't be Speaker of the House. The title should be Listener of the House. And part of doing this job right and getting to positive results like we got to today is listening to people. And what we heard from listening to a lot of people over the last few days is that more work needs to be done. And we're committed to doing that work.
The House off the rest of the week. They don't return next week. The Senate does. So if you want to stay up with what's going on at the State House and how you, the taxpayer, are being impacted, be sure to get the headlines in your inbox with the newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. And also be sure to subscribe right here to the Center Square Daily. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here to wrap up the week Friday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.